Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Kelly D'Amico and I'm a marketing specialist at ThreatConnect. I'm going to take a few minutes to go over some housekeeping items and the agenda, and then I'll introduce today's speakers. First, I want to let you know that everyone's phone lines are muted to keep background noise to a minimum. If you have questions, please ask them by typing them into the chat feature on your webinar console. We will answer questions at the end of the webinar. Second, the webinar is being recorded today. We will send out the recording as soon as we have it available. Now for the agenda. Today we're talking about customizing your threat intelligence with dashboards in ThreatConnect. We'll begin with an overview of why the ThreatConnect team developed dashboards that are user-friendly and digestible as well as personalizable. Then we'll show you our default dashboards and walk you through how to build your own. We'll end it with a Q&A. Now I'll introduce today's speakers. Dan Cole is the Director of Product Management at ThreatConnect. Dan has spent the last decade as a product manager working to create awesome software that gets to the core of solving unique problems faced by a myriad of industry verticals. Then we'll have Drew Gidwani. Drew is the Director of Analytics at ThreatConnect. He drives the health and scale of ThreatConnect customers' threat intelligence operations by identifying and addressing problems at the strategic and tactical levels. Previously, Drew worked for the Department of Defense, where he leveraged his varied analysis experiences to scale growing intelligence teams in the face of the ever-changing threats we face today. So that's it for me. Now I'll turn it over to Dan.
Well, first of all, thank you, Kelly, for the introduction, and thank you to everyone who has showed up for the webinar today. So I want to begin just by sort of teasing what you'll be able to create by the end of the webinar. This is a dashboard that has been designed for an analyst. It is interactive, it is customizable, and it is informative. So that's just a quick teaser. Before we get into how to build a dashboard, I want to just take you through the agenda, because the first thing I'm going to go through is why build a dashboard. We see products all the time that have dashboards, so why do security teams actually need them? Then I'm going to give you some actionable, simple rules for creating dashboards that don't suck. And when I say dashboards that don't suck, what I mean is dashboards that will actually do something for you and your security team, that you can actually check every day, every week, every minute if you need to, and that can actually drive you to make some decisions. Then I'll be turning it over to my colleague Drew, who will take you hands-on with how to implement some of those best practices directly in ThreatConnect using our new dashboarding feature. So the first thing I want to do is get through some basic definitions, and that is, what is a dashboard? So, you walk down the exhibit hall at Black Hat or at RSA, and you see vendors with a bunch of pie charts and line graphs and bar graphs, and a lot of them say dashboards. You see a lot of charting tools that are called dashboards, but at the end of the day, a dashboard is designed to be something that you monitor so that you can make decisions around how to act. So in the same way that threat intelligence is actionable information you can use to make decisions, a dashboard is the same thing. It's actionable information that you can use to make decisions at a glance. So why is this important for security teams? Well, security teams definitely need to make decisions. They need to make fast decisions. They need to make accurate decisions. So on the tactical side, what kinds of threats are trending this week? Are there specific sources that I should be investigating because maybe they introduced a new type of report or a relevant piece of intelligence this week? Dashboards can help security teams make strategic decisions. So maybe not on a weekly basis, but annual planning. What sources are providing most value to my team? And one of the things that I know is very challenging for a lot of security teams is demonstrating their value to the rest of the organization at large. So dashboards can help answer the question, how is my team providing value to the rest of the organization? And finally, confident control. Most security teams that I work with are typically dealing with dozens or even hundreds of individual security tools. and certainly anywhere from 2 to 100 plus team members. So dashboards give people a central area of control to know not only what is my team up to, but also what are my tools up to. So now we've talked a bit, so at the end of the day, it comes down to where should I be spending my attention? And with things like alert fatigue and being inundated with the Intel fire hose, your attention as a security professional is not only valuable, it is stretched to its max. So dashboards can be a real key tool to help you focus that attention on the areas where it is most needed. So now that we've talked about why security teams need dashboards, I want to talk a bit about how to build dashboards that you're actually going to use. Like you might have some pretty pictures, some nice pie charts, maybe a pew-pew map or two, and they may look pretty, but how often do they actually help you drive your workflow and help you make real decisions? So first of all, dashboards should not be an impenetrable fog that is impossible to understand. It should not be a space shuttle cockpit where you need an advanced engineering degree to understand what to do. This is not an industrial control system that you need 2 years of training to use your dashboard. It should be easy to understand and help you identify objectives at a glance. Nor should dashboards be nothing but pretty pictures that maybe look nice in a sales presentation, but don't actually help you make key decisions. Again, if it's all about where should I spend my attention, then having dashboards that have traffic lights and steering wheels and weird graphics and pew-pew maps probably aren't going to be that effective when using them day to day. I like to use the analogy of a car dashboard. Your car dashboard gives you key pieces of information you need to make decisions. What is my current speed? How much gas do I have left? Your car dashboard does not include things like a pie chart of how many times you've made left and right-hand turns. It does not include a counter for how blinky your turn signals are. It doesn't have a pew-pew map of which cars are honking where. It has the key things that you need to actually make decisions. So how do you avoid dashboards that don't tell a story, that don't help you focus your attention, and that actually convey meaningful information? And this is where we get into sort of the real concrete nitty-gritty of what I want everyone to take away from this presentation. And it's these 4 simple rules for creating usable dashboards. And I like to remember these 4 rules using a handy mnemonic or curve. So C stands for comparative. Is my dashboard showing me information that is contextualized? So if it says, 10 incidents, is that a lot? Is it a little? And I'll give specific examples of each of these in the next few slides. The U stands for understandable. So again, your dashboard should not be a space shuttle cockpit. It should be easy for anyone to understand what story is being told on the dashboard. Ideally, it should be a rate. It should give you an idea of which direction things are moving in. Is it increasing? Is it decreasing? And finally, the B, probably the most important one that I'll spend the most time on, is behavior changing. And if the dashboard is all about capturing your attention and helping you make decisions, then if your dashboard is not presenting information that helps you make decisions, then something needs to change. So let's dive in a little bit into the 4 simple rules. So the first one is comparative. So let's say that I wanted a simple dashboard chart that shows me what are some of the popular tags in my intelligence platform this week. What's hot, what's trending, what are my analysts looking at? I'm looking at the source level, maybe, what kinds of tags are popular in this source. And this is not a bad chart to include on a dashboard. It shows me that, domain generation algorithms are popular. It shows me that there are specific types of malware families that are popular. But, we can do better than this because this information is not actually put into context. So what happens if we add this week and compare it to last week? Now we have some context. We understand, is 14,915 items tagged domain generation algorithm, is that a lot? Is it a little? Is it part of a trend? Is it something I need to do something about? And by putting this side by side with what happened last week, I can see that the number of things that we've tagged domain generation algorithm has tripled. So comparative. We're putting things side by side so that we can get a better understanding. We start telling a story. So you want to ask yourself when building a dashboard, when you put a chart up or a metric up, ask yourself, does this chart or metric make sense in a vacuum? Or would it be more impactful if I actually had something to compare it against? For example, when looking at a trend. Next up, we've got understandable. This should be, fairly straightforward. You don't want the space shuttle cockpit. You want people to be able to, make sense of what is going on your dashboard. There's a reason that your car gives your speed in miles per hour and not, I don't know, leagues per microfortnight, or something that would just be impossible to understand and make a quick decision in your car around. So let's say I wanted to build a dashboard that helped me make decisions around Intel feeds. So maybe I want to see what are some of the popular types of intelligence that are coming in through this feed. Well, one way might be a pie chart that shows me the top tags that are in that feed. And so looking at this, okay, I can see that, maybe, I'm guessing this is APT, is the top tag, followed by China, but a lot of this text is cut off. This is just way too many things to stick into this chart. The colors are making my eyes bleed, and a dashboard you should be able to drill down on it. So if I want to click in and see, okay, what's going on with Unit 42? Well, maybe I'm just not good with the mouse, but I'm having a very hard time kind of centering on this to be able to click on it. This is not an understandable way to present this information. But if I take the exact same information and just restructure it so that it's more understandable, now I can see I don't lose anything. I'm not taking data away from the dashboard. I'm just making it easier to understand, easier to get a sense of what makes up this particular source. So I can, again, see APT, China. I can see a lot of things that are simply cut off by the pie chart because it's not an ideal way to present information. And if I want to drill down and see what's going on with Zscaler, it's a lot easier to click on that rectangle than it is on this teeny tiny wedge. And so understandable is not just about design, like it is in this case. It's also, am I presenting information that someone looking at this dashboard would be able to get, to follow? Am I using numbers that don't carry meaning beyond myself? Am I displaying things in a way where colors run together? Can I make sense of what I'm seeing? So the next piece I want to talk about is rate. So on your car dashboard, the biggest number on it is a rate. It is miles per hour. Now you also have miles driven in the form of your odometer, and that's important. But the key piece that your car is telling you to make decisions is a rate, miles per hour. So let's take a look at something that is not a rate. So let's say I want to keep tabs on and look for trends in things like false positives and how often different indicators are observed in my sim. So here we've got two spark lines, one showing observations over the past 30 days and one showing false positives over the past 11 days. And I can see that they go up and to the right. There's maybe a little spike here, but then it kind of stays up. So I don't know if this is a trend, if this is a spike. And numbers that go, charts like this that go up and to the right, often you'll hear them called vanity metrics. Things that go up and to the right are vanity metrics. And you'll see this a lot in like corporate presentations where they're talking about revenue or total users. And a weird quirk of math is that when you add two numbers together, they get bigger. So all this is telling me is that over time, I've gotten some observations, and that over time, I've gotten some false positives. And so no matter what, this chart will never go down. It will never show me really fluctuations. But if I turn this into a rate, for example, observations and false positives per day, it's the same data, but instead of adding it every day, like I would if this were like a corporate presentation about new customers, I can actually start to see some patterns emerge. So I can see that this was a spike followed by maybe a little tiny blip. I can see that we had a more recent but smaller spike. I can see that much more clearly that, yeah, we had some false positives, but the observations followed the false positives by about a week. So now I can look for trends. I can look for patterns. I can see things that are meaningful. So just to give you some examples here, we can compare sort of similar data in sort of the actionable version, where it's expressed as a rate, and the vanity version, where we're just adding things up. So just knowing total observations, as we can see, not something I can really take action on, versus observations per day. Now I can look for trends. Time spent detecting, might be something nice to report, but if you're trying to make decisions and improve process, that's why we look at mean time to detect. An average, it's a rate. How much intel have I created? How many incidents or campaigns am I tracking? That's great, but turning it into a rate where you're tracking it per analyst gives you more insight into, maybe the specific behaviors of different analysts. And again, the same thing with, if you're just measuring the total indicators you've deployed to your defensive devices, it's a nice vanity metric, but if you start tracking the number of indicators you've deployed today and pair it with maybe a comparative metric so you can compare today to yesterday, suddenly you're potentially opening yourself up to being able to identify useful red flags. Now, the final piece I want to talk about is probably the most important of the four rules, and that is behavior changing. Your dashboards should drive behavior. A big reason that fancy, showy dashboards fall short is because while they offer pretty pictures, they don't provide information that drives behavior. So I'd like to propose a litmus test. If you're using a dashboard, look at a chart, look at a number, look at a dashboard as a whole, and ask yourself, if the information I'm looking at changed, what would I do differently? So I'll give you an example. If you're driving in your car and you're in a residential area and your speedometer says 25 miles per hour, you're okay. And I ask you, what would you do differently if your speedometer said 100 miles per hour? You'd say, I would probably slow down. So intuitively how changes to your car dashboard would change your driving behavior. So your security dashboard, your threat intel dashboard should be the same way. So let me give you an example. Here we've got, we're piping to our dashboard a count of the number of indicators that have been deployed to our SIM. And it's a number card. It says that we deployed 21 indicators. And we'll say that maybe that was today. I don't know. But if I asked you, what would you do differently if that said 5 indicators deployed or 100 indicators deployed? Is that a lot? Is that a little? Is that unusual? You don't know because there's no context here. This is not a metric that if it changed would actually drive your behavior. Now compare that to if we applied some of the other rules we learned, where we are providing a chart that is much more comparative, that looks at rates, and now we're starting to get something that can actually change behavior. So now we're looking at over time how many indicators have been deployed to QRadar from ThreatConnect over time. So I can see that this 21 was actually a high point for the month. So maybe there's a lot of activity there. Not only can I see the number of successful deployments, I can also see the number of failed deployments. So if I asked you, what would you do differently if you saw that there were 20 failed indicator deployments? Well, you'd look here. You'd see that typically you get 1 or 0, so 20 failures is a big deal. You would probably leap on that. You would probably act. It looks like deployment is a fairly regular occurrence. If I asked you what you would do differently, if you saw no indicators deployed for a week, you'd know that's something unusual. You would probably jump on that. So this is a dashboard card that will actually drive your behavior. So 4 simple rules for building usable dashboards. Question is, when do you use these? Not all of these have to be used all the time. Not every card, not everything on your dashboard has to be comparative. Not everything has to be a rate. But in general, you want to put things in context. So I recommend making things comparative often. So, if you're showing just a number, ask yourself, is there a number that I should compare that number to? Understandable. I mean, ideally, you would make everything understandable. Rate, probably the least important of the 4, but definitely something you want to spend some time thinking about if you can. But behavior changing, always. If a dashboard is not getting used, it is generally because it is not encouraging behavior. So I like to think about it in terms of, ask yourself, if this metric or this chart, if this dashboard changed, what would you do differently? If the answer is, I don't know, probably nothing, then you have to ask yourself, why would I want this on my dashboard? Is there something I could do differently here that would actually change my behavior based on what is on the dashboard? So if the answer is, I don't know, one trick to use is think about it in a situation when this information would lead you to do something. Think of an example of the actual data that would appear and the action you would take in response. So going back to our previous example where we were looking at deployments to the SIM, ask yourself, when would tracking SIM deployment, indicator deployments to my SIM actually drive my behavior? Well, maybe if it failed, maybe if nothing happened in a few weeks, maybe if there was an unusual spike in the number of indicators deployed. Those are all things that could actually lead you to take some kind of action. So maybe those are things that should be displayed on your dashboard. So again, there we have 4 simple rules for creating usable dashboards. And now to actually get hands-on in building these dashboards in ThreatConnect, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Drew Gidwani, who is our Director of Analytics. So Drew, we're going to pass control over to you momentarily.
All righty, thank you for the introduction there, Dan. So hopefully this is coming across well for you guys. We're going to dive right into our public cloud environment here. I'm logged in a demo account. And we're going to get our hands dirty making a couple of dashboards, trying to use some of the rules that Dan just laid out in his slide deck. So this is one of the default dashboards that I think many of you would be greeted by when you first log in. And before we really dive into things, I want to call out a couple of key concepts. The first is that we do consider that there are different personas, different people that have different needs in different situations. So we wanted our dashboards to be very extensible and customizable. And so you can actually have a collection of dashboards. You can create dashboards for yourself. You can share them with your organization. And we even have a few that we had ready out of the box based on the things that we were hearing from customers, the problems that they knew they needed to solve, and frankly, some of the problems they didn't know that they needed to solve. And so a dashboard is merely a collection of these cards that you see here. And what we're going to do is dive into a dashboard, actually the one that Dan showed you earlier, and create some cards so that you guys can kind of see some of those principles in action and get used to the system and see how it works. So this is the dashboard that Dan had showed us before. It's got some really neat cards on it. Some super Kirby metrics are here, if you will. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make a copy of this. And we're going to start pecking away at this by actually removing some of these cards, and I'm going to show you how to create them from scratch. If we click this plus sign up top, this is going to allow us to configure a new card. And before we get any further into this, I want to call out that there's sort of 3 types of cards or families of cards that we consider to be very valuable in helping you guys build your dashboards. We're going to start on the left and work our way to the right because they go from the most simple fire and forget solution to things that have some really powerful functionality baked in. The first class of card is these widget cards. These are kind of pre-made, out of the box, minimal configuration needed. You guys have probably seen a lot of these things on the earlier dashboard or the main dashboard. And this could be something as simple as the My Recent History card. There's very little customization that you need to do to this, but if you wanted to, you could actually move it around as I just did. You could resize it if you wanted. This is going to allow you to take some of these other widget cards. As you see here, we have active incidents, open tasks, things like that. And even starting an investigation so that you can have those right on your dashboard if you need them at your fingertips. The next set of cards is this basic kind of metric. And these are things that the system computes at a regular interval. We have monitors under the hood that are tallying up things like observations, false positives, indicator counts, all those sorts of things. So if we were to start taking a look at something like activities here, you can see that there's all sorts of things that the system is totaling up for us every day. As Dan has pointed out, these actually obey some of the Kirby rules, right? These are relative, some of them are rates, they can drive action. And one of the really neat things that you can do here is actually configure all of the things that you want. You can actually omit certain sources from contributing to this if you want. If you decide that you don't actually want a sparkline of all of these things, you can remove a great many of these things and only track something like observations per day. Our system is actually smart enough, based on the kind of data that you're giving it, to give you the appropriate options for display values. So a sparkline would be great when you have 10 of these, but you might actually prefer to have something like a line chart if you only have one of these as a particular feed. Naturally, if you want, you can change sort of the date window that this may take into consideration, and if you'd also like, you can change some of the other options depending on the data that you're pulling in. Finally, we do have some visual and cosmetic adjustments that you can make if you'd like to change the colors around. There's all sorts of things that you can do to change to make sure that it's consistent, or it even encodes the kind of information that you're looking to bring to the table. So let's change the name of this real quick. And we've got ourselves the line graph. The next thing that I want to show you is actually not going to start here on the dashboard, but instead it's going to start here on the browse screen. Now, a lot of you may spend a lot of time in the browse screen slicing and dicing, looking for certain information. This is one of the best ways that we have to pull apart the different types of data that ThreatConnect has. A lot of you may be familiar with this filter section where you can look for indicators that have certain tags. You can look for certain types of indicators. As an example, I may actually only want to see things that have a certain threat assess score. And if you're unfamiliar with threat assess, that's our system's way of combining all of the different types of intelligence, including analyst judgment, observations, false positive reports, and things like that. It's on a 1,000 point scale. So maybe I care about things that are 500 to 1,000. I can hit apply and it'll load all of the things that meet that threshold. But maybe I have a particular need that I need solved on the dashboard. As Dan said, I have a certain burning question that I know is going to change my behavior. And that's where we can actually take this a step further and use our ThreatConnect query language, or I'll call it TQL or TQL for short. And to get to that, you can actually click on this Advanced tab right here. Before we dive any further, what you may notice is that all of the things that we configured, which boxes we checked on the left, any of the filters that we applied in the UI, have been converted over to our query language. This is really powerful because you'll see this in the URL bar, which means that you can copy and paste this to somebody else. You can bookmark it and come back to this query if you're in the middle of an investigation. And one of the other really neat things is there's a lot of advanced syntax over here on the left, and actually even a link to our knowledge base, which will walk you through how to get started with TQL, along with all sorts of different parameters and options if you want to really get your hands dirty. So maybe as I'm looking at all of these things, what I really care about are things that we've observed in our network. And I've got a bidirectional integration set up, and these observations are being reported by a SIM or endpoint devices. And so I can see here that there is a separate field that I can use for observation count. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. I'm just saying, and observation count is greater than 0. I hit search, and now I have an even more filtered list of about 21,000 results. The really powerful thing about TQL in conjunction with dashboards is that we can actually save this data set, and we can use that to drive one of the cards on our dashboard. In order to do that, I can click Save Current Query up here on the right, and I can say critical indicators with observations, and hit Save. And then when I come up here, what I can do is actually create a new card, and you'll see here that I have certain queries that have been saved, including this guy right here that we just made. And that's going to start to build a chart for us. Now, as Dan pointed out, there are certain things that maybe we care more about, and we may want to decide how we massage the presentation of this data. As an example, you can decide that you care about certain indicators, or you want to exclude certain indicators, which we could have done in the query stage. We can edit that query here if we'd like. We can decide, how do we want this presented? Maybe a pie chart is not the best way to digest this information. I've decided that for this query, what I really care about is what kind of country codes we're seeing in our observed IP addresses. I know where my company does business and where we don't. So what I'm actually going to do is change this group by setting. Instead of worrying about the type of indicator so that the pie chart would be host and address, I'm going to look at one of the other facets of the data, which is country code. Now this looks a lot like Dan's slide, and he'll beat me over the head if I continue forward like this. So what I need to do is find a better way to make this information actionable. The first thing is, I don't necessarily care about 25 different country codes. Maybe I only care about the top 5. And suddenly we have a much cleaner pie chart. I'm also not a huge fan of most pie charts, so I think something like the number cards here would be more helpful. Finally, if you're like me and you're a little persnickety about color encoding and things like that, I may decide that rather than having these colors try to connote something, I would rather just stick with a flat blue or a green or whatever color makes sense for you. Let's drag this out a little bit so that it fits nicely, and we have a nice big number card. And this is one of those actionable things where if I log in tomorrow and I suddenly see that we have 5,000 observed indicators from Russia, and that doesn't make sense for my business, I can immediately click on one of these cards. It will take me right back to the browse screen and show me, based on the query that I had built and the button that I'd clicked, which indicators match that, so I can dive in and start my investigation right off the bat. The final thing that I want to show you is one of the other things that Dan alluded to. I skipped over it a little bit when we talked about these metrics, but let's get back to it now. We do have the ability to define custom metrics, and these can be modified in all sorts of ways, including playbooks, via the external API, via some of our integrations, and these are basically custom counters that are super powerful. So let's use the one that Dan had as an example in his slide, and say that I care about the last 60 days worth of data for how many indicators we sent down to our SIM. In order for this to be actionable, I think I have an idea in mind of how I'd like this to look. But let me start by changing the colors pretty quickly. I don't like this rainbow linear. And if I go back, we'll have something very similar to what Dan had in his slides. Naturally, it's down here, but if I want, I can pull it right back up here. And there we go. We've got our little dashboard created. As you guys see, there's plenty of other cool cards here. There's a lot of other interesting things that we can do, just to give you a quick tour. Some of these are based on custom queries like you saw before. So these are indicators that have an attribute that describes them as command and control nodes that I've observed this week. So I know which C2 indicators are popping off in my network. There's some understanding of sources where we can understand which sources maybe are providing the most noise on my network, or we could even join this with false positives if we wanted. We also have an overview of the incidents that we have open in terms of their status levels and the tags that are kind of describing incidents. and then some of my personal workflow stuff here on the right so that I know where I am in my day-to-day. And if I wanted to, once we created this, I could share it out. And then the rest of my team, whether it's the threat intel team or the SOC or the incident responders, or maybe we just need to have a consistent dashboard that we put up on the TV in the war room, everybody can be working off of the same sheet of music. And with that, I think we can open the floor to Q&A.
All right, thanks, Dan and Drew. So we'll move on to a couple of questions that have come through, and you guys can answer them as I read them. So the first question we have is, can either of you recommend any additional resources for people who want to create their own charts or dashboards?
Additional resources, good question. Hopefully we have some data visualization geeks on the line, so this will be old hat for them. Dashboard research. Okay, so a good place to start would be Ed Tufte. He wrote a book called the Visual Display of Quantitative Information. It's a little older, but it's a really good primer for anyone working with charting or business intelligence tools or dashboarding. A more modern take would be some of the books by Stephen Few, who we quoted at the beginning of the presentation. He wrote a book called Now You See It, which covers a lot of the best practices we talked about as far as creating charts. And then same gentleman, Stephen Few, also wrote a book specifically about dashboards. I am blanking on the name of it right now, but if you just Google Stephen Few Dashboard Design Book, it's going to cover a lot of what someone would need to know when designing a dashboard. It covers a lot of these same best practices and a lot more. So yeah, Ed Tufte and Stephen Few, both really good resources to check out if this is a topic that interests you just in general.
Okay. Next question, can I show data from my other security products in the ThreatConnect dashboard?
Can I show data from my other, yes. The question is, can I show data from my other security products in my dashboard? I assume that means like your SIM or your endpoint detection devices or firewalls, or I guess maybe even like enrichment tools like VirusTotal. The answer is yes. Drew, I know, showed a bit of our custom metrics capability. So via our API or via Playbooks, if you have that available, you can actually connect third-party tools and monitor that in ThreatConnect. So the example that we used with QRadar as our SIM, that is pulling data from QRadar and displaying it in ThreatConnect. So in terms of a dashboard being sort of a central place to monitor things at a glance, I'd say it's almost essential to be able to bring in data from different tools so that you can all have it in one place. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. Do all ThreatConnect users get dashboards?
Very good question. So dashboards was actually introduced in our latest release, 5.4, and all users have access to the out-of-the-box dashboards that we provide. And we have three. One is just kind of a general threat intel dashboard. One is designed for doing deep dives on source analysis, and one is designed sort of an operational use case. But if you want to extend that and really get into some of the stuff that Drew was showing you, where you're actually designing your own dashboards and you are adding things like custom metrics, those are available in our TC Analyze product as well as our TC Complete product. So everyone gets some out-of-the-box dashboards, but to actually create and modify them requires TC Analyze or TC Complete.
Okay. Next question says, I really liked Top Observation Producers This Week card that was on the dashboard that Drew showed, but you didn't show it. Can you walk through how you made that?
Sure thing.
Sure.
So that was actually, I can pop open this edit button here and show you guys the actual query. And it's a very simple query. There's a last observed field that that TQL exposes, and there's a relative date feature. So instead of having to go in and you know, you probably don't want to go in and change your query every day to say November 13th to December 13th. Just saying today minus 30 days or 7 days or whatever you want allows you to tally up the indicators that are observed in that window. And if you wanted to slice and dice this, you could have, you know, you could end this with indicators that have certain tags or a certain threat assess rating, things like that. And then all I did was take the top 5 grouped by the owner name. And the nice thing about that is it gives you the spit out just like we saw with the country codes from before. And you know, you could extend this if you really wanted to look at which sources are producing the most false positives for you if you needed to go in and kind of reevaluate your collection posture, or you know, your budgeting for certain premium feeds that you may be paying for.
Thanks, Drew. And someone was kind enough to write in while Drew was answering that Stephen Pugh's dashboard book that I quoted earlier was Information Dashboard Design, the Effective Visual Communication of Data. Dry title, but highly recommended for people who are getting into dashboards. So thank you to whoever wrote in with that answer.
Okay, so that's all the time we have for today. If you have any further questions, we will be reaching out to you via email. As I said earlier, this webinar is being recorded, and we will be sending out the final recording as soon as it's available. Thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you at the next ThreatConnect webinar.